Amid the dusty trails and rattling gunfire of the American frontier, a parallel world thrived just behind velvet curtains. During the mid to late 1800s, the Wild West was not only a battleground for pioneers and outlaws, but also home to another kind of legend, one that unfolded within dimly lit parlors and gaslit brothels. These houses of ill repute, often overlooked by formal histories, played a significant role in shaping frontier life. Far from being just places of pleasure, they were institutions of survival, economic hubs, and social landmarks in a lawless land. As the sun dipped below rugged hills, flickering lanterns came to life in towns built on gold, dreams, and grit. Cowboys, miners, gamblers, and drifters poured into these establishments, drawn by the promise of warmth, companionship, and escape. Women like Julia Bulette and DeVere didn't just manage these houses, they ruled them with velvet gloves over iron fists. The Wild West wasn't built only by gunslingers and prospectors. It was also forged by women who knew how to survive in a world that offered them no mercy. These women turned societal rejection into resilience and carved their place into the rough-hewn lore of the frontier. The brothels weren't mere dens of vice, they were sanctuaries where dreams flickered like oil lamps, where secrets were traded like gold dust, and where women led with business savvy and brutal courage. As we delve into the unsung legacy of these red light realms, we uncover more than salacious tallies. We discover the forgotten architects of Western civilization. The history of the Wild West is incomplete without them. Their stories, layered in shadow and light, reveal a truth long ignored: that power, even in petticoats, shaped the soul of the American frontier. The explosive growth of brothels in the Wild West wasn't born of vice alone, it was born of need. When gold was discovered in California in 1848, thousands of men rushed westward, driven by dreams of riches. These gold camps quickly evolved into boomtowns, bursting with opportunity but sorely lacking balance. With an overwhelming surplus of men and few women, a vacuum formed, one that women, often with limited options of their own, rushed to fill. In these raw and restless settlements, the arrival of a single brothel could stabilize a town's economy and morale. Places like San Francisco, Virginia City, and Deadwood saw the rise of elegant parlors masked in scandal. Within these walls, women didn't just survive, they thrived, turning the business of intimacy into empires. Artoy, a Chinese immigrant who arrived in 1849, was one of the earliest recorded Despite facing racism and legal resistance, she carved out a formidable presence, catering to lonely miners with charm, wit, and a shrewd understanding of male vulnerability. She wasn't alone. Mary Catherine Heroni, known as Big Nose Kate, became another towering figure as Doc Holliday's partner. She defied every convention of the time, owning and operating a house in Kansas that was both feared and admired. As towns formed and fell, these brothels became permanent fixtures, anchor points in places where everything else felt temporary. The Homestead Act of 1862, which granted settlers land in the West, further fueled migration. With families slow to follow and few legal entertainment outlets, brothels filled a unique social role, blurring the line between business and community. Contrary to popular belief, many of these houses operated under self-imposed codes. Madams established rules for decorum, health inspections, and respect between patrons and workers. They hired musicians, offered refreshments, and even hosted charity events. Julia Bulette of Virginia City became so beloved that she was made an honorary firefighter, a rare civic honor for a woman in her profession. In newspapers, the brothel was often condemned as a moral blight, yet privately, city leaders recognized its value. Taxes and fines from these establishments often funded public infrastructure like roads, schools, and hospitals. A paradox emerged, one in which sin was essential to order. The Wild West wasn't a place of neat morality. It was a chaotic forge, shaping its own ethics on the fly. And the brothels, hidden behind painted doors and heavy velvet curtains, became pillars of that new order. They were more than just places of pleasure. They were centers of commerce, female autonomy, and social negotiation, reflecting both the desperation and opportunity that defined frontier life. To step into a brothel was to step into the heart of a town's soul, and at its center, a woman often scorned by society held it all together. In a time when women were expected to stay silent, serve quietly, and remain unseen in public affairs, a daring few did the opposite. They took center stage in the rowdiest towns of the Wild West, not by accident but by ambition. These women were the madams, the self-made queens of brothels, businesswomen who knew how to command respect, turn profits, and protect their girls in the harshest conditions imaginable. Their stories aren't just a spice of Western folklore, that they are the very foundation of it. Among the most iconic was Julia Bulette, remembered as the Queen of Virginia City. Arriving in Nevada in the 1860s during the Comstock Lode silver boom, Julia stood out not just for her beauty, but for her compassion and intelligence. She didn't just run a brothel, she cultivated a home. Her establishment offered food, warmth, medical care, and emotional comfort to the miners who flocked to her door. In a community dominated by men, hardened by labor and loneliness, she brought softness and humanity. When she was murdered in 1867, the town mourned as if they'd lost royalty. Businesses shut down, a parade was held in her honor, and she was buried with full public ceremony, something almost unheard of for a woman in her line of work. Her death marked the end of an era, but her legend lived on in ballads, books, and even dime novels that romanticized her tragic fate. Then there was Pearl DeVere, known as the soiled dove of Cripple Creek. Pearl operated the Old Homestead, a brothel that redefined luxury in the Colorado mining town. Her parlor was a masterpiece, decorated with imported French furniture, velvet wallpaper, and a chandelier that glittered like a statement of dominance. Clients were screened, charged high prices, and treated like nobility. Pearl herself dressed in the finest gowns and was rumored to refuse appointments with men who lacked good manners or a respectable reputation. Her goal was not just wealth, it was class. Pearl died young, reportedly from an overdose of morphine or sleeping pills in 1897. Yet, even in death, she made a statement. Her funeral was extravagant, paid for by townspeople who felt her absence like a cold gust through the canyon. Her house still stands today as a museum, a testament to her flair and force. Denver's Matilda Motteseux, however, may have been the most financially savvy of them all. By the 1870s, Mattie owned multiple properties, ran several brothels, and controlled a small empire in the heart of Colorado. She was known for her rivalry with fellow Madam Katie Fulton, and their feud culminated in a sensational public duel in 1877. Both women allegedly fired shots at each other in full view of the public. Yet Mattie survived the scandal, rebuilt her business, and even invested in real estate. She treated her profession with unapologetic pragmatism. "I went into the sporting life for business reasons," she famously said, "and for no other. It was a way for a woman to make money, and I'd made it, in a world where women were rarely allowed to own property or run enterprises." Mattie broke the mold repeatedly and successfully. Not far behind in legend was Eleanor Dumont, better known as Madame Moustache for her distinctive facial hair. Dumont was a French woman who arrived in Nevada City, California, in the 1850s with a deck of cards and a sharp mind. She was an expert blackjack dealer and opened a gambling parlor of her own. Eventually, she combined gambling with courtship, turning her place into a hybrid brothel casino, an innovative concept that drew crowds from across the region. Though she battled depression later in life and ultimately died by suicide, her legacy lives on as a rare example of a woman who could outdeal, outwit, and outlast most men in her field. Mary Catherine Heroney, or Big Nose Kate, is another name inseparable from Wild West lore. Though best known as the companion of gunslinger Doc Holliday, Kate was a force in her own right. Born into an educated Hungarian family and orphaned young, she immigrated to America and turned to the brothel business not out of weakness but out of fierce independence. She moved through Dodge City, Tombstone, and other lawless towns, opening establishments and living by her own code. Her relationship with Holliday was stormy and passionate, one of mutual reliance, more than romance. Kate was smart, fearless, and deeply aware of the risks her profession entailed. In her old age, she left the business and settled quietly in Arizona, dying in obscurity in 1940 but never forgotten in Western Tailies. What bound these women together wasn't just their profession, it was their resilience. They ran businesses where the risk of violence was high, where disease could sweep through in a night, where law enforcement turned a blind eye or demanded bribes, and where social scorn was guaranteed. Yet, they created safe spaces for their workers, enforced health protocols, hired security, and often acted as informal therapists to broken men passing through. They were more than business owners. They were matriarchs in a male-dominated wilderness. Their influence extended beyond the saloons and bedrooms. In many frontier towns, madams were among the first to fund schools, contribute to church fundraisers, and support orphanages. They employed dozens of people, cooks, cleaners, musicians, and tailors, stimulating the local economy far beyond what was visible at their doorsteps. While society refused to legitimize their contribution, the towns they helped build told another story. In places like Helena, San Antonio, and Deadwood, the economy would have collapsed without them. And while their world often demanded silence, many madams found ways to tell their stories, whether through court testimony, letters, or memoirs. Some even made it into early photographs, standing proudly outside their establishments dressed in silk but rooted in steel. These women defied everything the era expected of them. They didn't seek permission. They didn't wait for rescue. They didn't ask for pity. Instead, they fought for space, dignity, and survival in a brutal world. Their stories were buried under shame and stereotype for over a century, but the truth has finally begun to surface. These weren't merely fallen women. They were founders. They were legends. They were the wild in the Wild West. Behind the closed doors of Wild West brothels, a world pulsed with rhythm, ritual, and resilience, often seen by outsiders as dens of depravity. These establishments were complex communities built on routine and survival. As dusk settled over the dusty towns, brothels came to life. Women dressed in silks, musicians tuned instruments, and madams ensured every detail was in place. These houses were as much about presentation as profit. At the center stood the madam, part businesswoman, part matriarch, who orchestrated the evening, screened patrons, resolved disputes, and maintained order. Rules were strict: no violence, theft, or disrespect. For all their scandalous reputation, brothels often operated with more civility than saloons or streets outside. The women, known as ladies of the evening, lived lives of contradiction. During business hours, they were entertainers and confidants, but off the clock, they shared meals, laughter, and pain. Many came from broken homes, failed marriages, or immigrant backgrounds. For them, the brothel offered not just income but shelter, community, and control in a chaotic world. Despite rivalries, bonds formed, a sisterhood forged in hardship. Health was a constant concern, with disease spreading easily in cramped quarters. Many madams hired doctors for regular checkups and enforced hygiene standards, treating health concerns as business, not just morality. A sick workforce meant lost income. Life inside varied. On some nights, music, laughter, and perfume filled the air. On others, exhaustion or heartbreak hung heavy. Yet, the women endured, carving their names into the frontier's soil. Figures like Big Nose Kate, Artois, and Eleanor Dumont became legends. Big Nose Kate, partner to Doc Holliday, ran her own establishment, living fiercely on her terms. Artois, a Chinese immigrant, thrived in San Francisco's gold rush despite racism and violence. Dumont, known as Madame Mustache, was a successful card dealer and brothel owner who ultimately met a tragic end. Though their lives were often marked by hardship, their cultural influence was significant. Brothels became places of refuge for those who didn't fit into conventional society. Figures like Jean Bonnet, a woman who dressed as a man, challenged gender norms long before modern society was ready. These brothels, despite their stigmas, provided rare safe havens in a harsh world. As time passed, however, the progressive era led to the closing of many brothels. The passing of the Mann Act in 1910 made interstate activity illegal, and economic factors like the Great Depression further impacted the industry. Yet, their influence didn't vanish. Legal brothels in Nevada remain today, and the stories of these women continue to inspire. Their legacy is one of courage, complexity, and unspoken impact. The brothels may have closed, but their stories still linger in the shadows, whispers of perfume, lace, and defiance. The Wild West wasn't just built with bullets and gold. It was also stitched together by women who refused to be forgotten.